Hi everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Ivy Zhang. I'm the president of HES Psychology Student Club. And this event is hosted by HES Psychology Student Club and Harvard Extension School Students Association. And we're so excited to bring together students from all across the HES community for this great conversation. I'm joined by my amazing colleagues from the club, Maya Bach, Scully Wang, and Annie Farrell. Thank you so much for you all being here. As we're in Women's History Month, we're especially glad to host a discussion that touches on creating fair and more equitable workplaces, which is relevant across many fields and experiences. So today's session will include a short presentation followed by a fireside chat, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. So now I'm so honored to introduce our speaker, Siri Chilazi. Siri is a senior researcher at the Women and Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy School. She is an internationally recognized expert on advancing gender equality in organizations. Her work focuses on identifying practical, evidence-based ways to make workplaces fair by improving systems and processes. She collaborates with organizations around the world, from large multinational companies to startups, and her work has been widely featured in leading media outlets. She is also the co-author of Make Work Fair, which offers actionable research-backed strategies for building more equitable workplace. I actually have a copy here, which was signed by her. I was fortunate enough to have her autograph. Thank you so much. So we're truly honored to have her with us today. Siri, thank you so much again for joining us. Now I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ivy, for having me and for that wonderful introduction. And also, thank you all for joining. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. And like Ivy said, I'm going to give a short presentation, but I'm most excited today to hear your reflections, your life experiences, and how all of this resonates with you. So I welcome all your questions, comments, challenges in the chat at any point, including throughout the presentation. Let me quickly share my slides, and then we will dive right in. I hope you all can see that. If not, you will let me know. So I want to share with you some evidence-based ideas of how to build better workplaces that are truly fair for everyone. Now, what do I mean by fair? I mean workplaces where everyone has an equal opportunity to not just get in the door in the first place, but also where everyone encounters a level playing field with equal access to opportunities and supports to thrive, so that we're actually able to identify who is the best employee, who has the most potential, and therefore who should get the biggest raise, or who should get promoted, or who should ultimately be advanced to senior leadership. Because unfortunately, the data today shows pretty clearly that there's a lot of biases that cause us not to always select the best performing people for the right roles at the right time. And I'd like to start by introducing you to Astrid Linder, the woman here on the left. She is a Swedish engineer, and she serves as the research director for Sweden's equivalent of our National Highway Transportation Safety Administration here in the US. So, in her own words, Astrid's job is to keep all occupants of cars as safe as possible in Sweden. But Astrid also knows that this is not happening, unfortunately, because data around the world shows that even though men drive a little bit more than women, and therefore they are statistically more likely to be involved in a car accident, women are much more likely to get injured and even to die in car accidents. And there's a very clear reason for this. Some of you might know that around the world, including here in the US, regulations only require car companies to safety test their cars on crash dummies that are modeled on the average man's body. So when car companies are designing the safety features of cars, they're designing features that keep that average man's body safe, but not necessarily others. And it turns out that there's some important biological differences between women's and men's bodies, including torso shape and size and joint laxity, things that most of us would never even think of, that therefore keep women less safe. Now, in Astrid's role, she didn't have the power to change regulations in countries around the world, but she and her team had the power to do something else. And they actually put their engineering skills to work and created the world's first crash test dummy modeled on a woman's body. That was in 2013. It's on the right here in the picture. The name of the dummy is Eva Rid. And since then, fast forwarding to today, car companies have started creating more diverse dummies. Other researchers have taken it upon themselves to create dummies modeled on pregnant women's bodies, large women, small women, large men, small men, so that we now have a much greater variety of dummies that exist that can help keep people safe. And actually, in the EU and in the United States, regulators are catching up, and there's proposals on the table to require car companies to use these dummies in their tests as well. So why am I sharing with you this story? Because presumably none of us have as our jobs designing the safety features of cars. Well, it's because Astrid did what my co-author Iris Bennett and I suggest based on the evidence that we all should do in order to make work fair. And that is keep doing the job that we're already doing, but find ways to make it fairer and more objective. In other words, making work fair is not a program, but it's a way of doing things. It's specifically a way of doing all the things that we're already doing. You don't have to attend a new training. You don't have to join a new task force. You don't have to go to a once a month networking event, right? You don't have to pile these one-off programs onto your plate, but rather look at all the activities that you're already doing. You're giving colleagues feedback. You're sitting in meetings. You might be involved in hiring people or making promotion decisions or giving performance evaluations. If those are the types of activities that comprise 80 or 90% of how you spend your working time, those are the things that we should tweak and make more fair. So I'd like to give you a couple of very concrete real world examples of how we all can do this in our own work. And I'm going to give you those examples following the framework that Iris and I present in our book, Make Work Fair, which is that in order to truly embed fairness into our organizations, we have to make fairness count, we have to make it stick, and we have to make it normal. Making fairness count is all about using the same tools to manage fairness that we already use to run our so-called core business, whether that's, teaching and learning and research, which is our core business at Harvard, or perhaps making more iPhones, as would be Apple's business, or even serving constituents better, like would be the business of a governmental entity. So what are those tools that we typically use? Well, we collect data on the things that we care about. We set goals to help us move in the right direction. We often institute incentives to help motivate our people to actually behave differently in order to achieve the goals. And then, of course, we track the data and share it transparently in order to create a loop of accountability so that if we are moving in the right direction, good things happen. And if we're failing on our goals, there's going to be some consequences. This is exactly how we should manage fairness as well. And this is what Roz Atkins, a journalist at the BBC, he's the gentleman here on the left, did a few years ago. Roz was at the time the anchor of a nightly primetime news program on BBC News. And he realized that even though he cared passionately about representing the world accurately as it is, he actually had no data to know whether he was succeeding on that goal. He had no data on who were the people that he was featuring on air every night for 60 minutes on his program. So instead of waiting for HR to come hand him the data, Roz decided with his team to generate it himself. They started spending 2 minutes at night after each night's program, literally counting with a post-it note and a pen, how many people did we have on screen tonight? How many of them were women? How many of them were men? They would count every night, and then after a month, they averaged out the results. And to their surprise, they discovered that only 39% of their contributors were women, which is obviously not reflective of the world, which is pretty much 50-50. So Roz and his 4 or 5 colleagues set themselves a goal of getting to 50-50. And in fact, within 4 months, they got there and stayed there for years, for as long as this program was on air. But then part two of the story is even more remarkable because once Roz had proven this concept of data driven change on his show, he then started sharing it with his other journalist colleagues at the BBC, saying, listen, I know you're a busy journalist just like me. The news is constantly coming at us. There's a million last minute changes, but we still figured out a really simple, pretty not time consuming system to improve the representation in our journalism. It's worked for my team and it might work for you too. Let me know if you'd want to try it. And long story short, fast forward from 2017 to today, or actually even last year, 2025, more than 750 content creating teams across the BBC globally had used Roz's simple counting methodology, which has now become known as 50-50, the Equality Project, and more than 150 external partner organizations around the world, ranging from journalism schools to other media companies to even consumer packaged goods companies have joined. That's how one person, without even trying in the beginning, ignited a global movement to change the face of journalism. And that's also the power of making fairness count through something simple as collecting data, setting goals, and following your progress to actually follow through. So once we've made fairness count, we need to make it stick. And making fairness stick is all about making small tweaks into our existing ways of operating, not starting a brand new project or program, but just doing what you're already doing a little bit better. One of my favorite examples comes from resumes. My guess is all of you have one. My guess is also that most of your resumes are in this traditional format that lists a past work experience you have along with the specific dates attached. You were a junior project manager from 2007 to 2019. Now, one of the things that this default formatting makes very explicit is if someone, for whatever reason, has a gap on their resume. So here you can see Robert Matthews' previous experience ended in 2003 and his next one started in 2007. There's a 4-year gap when we don't quite know what Roberts was up to. And research shows that recruiters around the world tend to discriminate against candidates with these kinds of resume gaps, even though there's no data to suggest that people with non-continuous work histories are any worse workers. But the employers have this biased perspective that if someone took time off from the workforce for any reason, that they're less desirable hire. So some of my colleagues in the UK ran a fantastic experiment where they applied to more than 9,000 real world jobs, ranging from financial analyst to nurse to administrative assistant and a variety of other jobs. And they tested a slight redesign of the resume format so that instead of expressing past experience with the dates, you instead listed the number of years. 4 years as a project assistant, 12 years as a junior project manager. And note that this reframe doesn't lose any information that's relevant to assessing a candidate's competence or their qualifications. You still know exactly what they did and for how long. You just don't know exactly when. And lo and behold, they found in this large scale study that both women's and men's chances of being invited to an interview for a job that they'd applied for increased by 11%. Because employers were now able to make better matches between the skills that they needed and the skills that candidates actually had to offer. And they weren't distracted by irrelevant information, like whether someone had a small gap on their resume. So a super small tweak into how we format our resumes, big meaningful differences in who actually gets hired. In a similar vein, one of Australia's largest employers had discovered an interesting gap in their internal data. They saw that among candidates who had applied internally for a leadership position, but who had not gotten the position, men were almost twice as likely as women to reapply for a similar opening. And of course, from this employer's perspective, they wanted these people who were high potential, who had already been vetted once, they wanted to keep them in the pool for future opportunities. So again, they ran an experiment testing a super, super small tweak. They were already sending out an email to the top 20% of rejected candidates saying, thank you for applying. We're sorry you didn't get the job this time, but there's many similar openings in the future. Please reapply. And now they added one sentence to the email that accurately informed candidates that, in fact, you were in the top 20%. And watch what happened. On the left here, we can see the original situation where men in the blue bar are almost twice as likely as women to reapply. And now in the middle, we can see that this gender gap has closed in reapplications. Women have become more likely than before to reapply, and men slightly less. So again, making fairness stick is about testing small tweaks to the things that you're already doing, like adding one sentence to an email, in order to level the playing field for everybody and to make sure that we're benefiting from the best talent. Finally, making fairness normal is about embedding fairness to the everyday informal interactions that we have with colleagues on top of things like formal organizational processes, hiring, promotions, and policies like flexible work or parental leave. And one of the most common places where we have everyday interactions with colleagues, of course, is meetings. Novartis, the large pharmaceutical company based in Switzerland, ran a wonderful experiment with the one-on-one meetings that take place between managers and their direct reports. Their goal was to increase employees' sense of belonging, but also psychological safety, people's comfort in taking interpersonal risks at work and maybe raising perspectives that go against those of senior leaders. And the experiment was simply that they gave managers different guidelines on how to conduct these one-on-one meetings. And then later, employees were surveyed about how much they feel like they belong and what their perceptions of psychological safety are. And what they found was that there was one guideline that was by far the most effective at raising both feelings of belonging and psychological safety. And interestingly, the same guideline also resulted in managers and their employees having more one-on-one meetings because those meetings were now better and more valuable. So what was the guideline, right? Everybody's dying to know. The guideline invited managers to speak less and to listen more in the meeting. In other words, to sort of turn over control to their employee and say, what's on your mind? What do you need? What roadblocks are you encountering? And then how can I, as your manager, be your thought partner in helping to resolve those issues and make you as productive as possible? So sometimes making work fair is as simple as telling managers to conduct meetings a little bit differently. So I know I flew a lot in a very short amount of time. I just wanted to pop up my LinkedIn there and my email so that you all have my contact information in case you'd like to continue the conversation. I would certainly love to continue the conversation, but for now, I'm going to stop the screen share so that we can have a live conversation here with Ivy and with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Siri. That was really insightful. I really like the
Thank
make
you.
it count, make it stick, and make it as norm, right? So that's what's really impressive. A lot of things to unpack. Yeah, I'd love to hear about I have so many questions I want to ask based on your presentation, based on how I know about your research. But my first question
Yeah.
goes to you. What inspired you to focus your research on making workplace fair and
Mm,
leveling the playing field? I think most of us may be very curious about that. What's your
yeah.
story?
Long story short, it's personal lived experience. So I've always been very passionate about sort of equality. It never makes any sense to me, even as a kid, that somebody's skin color or the gender that they were born with that they can't choose would impact what they can do in life, the respect that they can get, which career they can pursue. It just never made any sense to me. But I never really encountered these biases or these unfair outcomes in my own life until my first job out of college. I went into management consulting and I encountered all the typical dynamics of, entry level 50% women, 50% men, but the partners at the top, only 10% of the partners were women. I was myself underpaid relative to my male colleagues. And when I found out, and when I went to HR and said that this is unacceptable, they flat out refused to pay me equally. I had a lot of female colleagues who I personally worked with who were really impressive. And then male colleagues who, based on my personal experience, were less impressive, who were promoted faster and promoted to higher levels. So I saw all these things firsthand that previously I had only read about, and I realized, oh my gosh, we're in the 21st century and these problems are still real. They still haven't been solved. I can't believe it. So that was the thing that galvanized me to want to dedicate my life and my career to helping make sure that workplaces are actually a level playing field for everyone. And we've got still a lot of work to do.
Thank you. I think we have a lot of related experiences to share as well. Thank you
Mm,
so much for that.
yeah.
And I really like those examples you give to us during your presentation. And you, first you started make it count, right? So immediately came to my mind was a question because a lot of times for the policy to work, we think about it. It has to come from the leadership.
Mm,
Has come from top-down approach, right? So when we talk about make it count, so who should be accountable for those kind of
mm.
results?
That's a fantastic question. I think the answer is everybody in their own way, right? So let me give you a real world example. In this consulting firm, about 6 months after I joined, they invited me to be part of the recruiting team for interns, right? Because I'm very, very, very junior. Now, I, of course, wasn't the final decision maker, but they did have me conducting interviews with these prospective interns. And I had full freedom to conduct those interviews however I wanted. I received minimal guidance. I'll be honest with you, if I had known then everything that I know today about what the research says about minimizing biases and improving decision making in an interview context, I would have conducted those interviews totally differently. You want to basically predetermine the questions that you're going to ask. Ask all the same questions of the different candidates you're interviewing so that you can compare their answers in an apples to apples manner. You want to have a predetermined grading rubric, and you ideally want to grade during the interview as you go along, because if you wait all the way until the end, now there's already memory distortions and other biases that come into play. Anyway, there's more, but just to give you an example. So I did not have the control to influence recruitment policy for the entire company, but I could have conducted my own interviews in the most evidence based and most objective manner. Part one, like Roz Atkins, he's collecting data for his own team. And then once I did that, I could have gone to the colleagues on the recruitment team and said, hey, listen, I've read about the research on how to conduct interviews in the best way. I've been doing it this way. You might find this helpful also. And then we could have started, so from the ground up, scaling some of these practices across this whole global company. So it's in that sense that I say everyone is accountable, because even as the most junior person on the team, you still have control over all of your work. And of course, if you're more senior, if you're running the recruitment, or if you're the global head of HR, you have more power and more ability to make top down changes that quickly impact more people. But in any level, in any role, we can be accountable for making our own work more fair. And frankly, if everybody did that, our workplaces would be so much better so quickly.
Thank you. That's very inspiring. We definitely should have everybody to have this kind of initiative to make it fair for everyone, right, in the workplace. That's
Exactly.
wonderful, wonderful to hear. So you mentioned about like some program. It's not like a program. It's like the
Mm,
way of doing things, right?
yeah.
So I think for a lot of companies, they are thinking of, when we think about like diversity initiatives, they tend to focus on raising awareness or changing individual behaviors. And but your work tend to emphasize on changing the system and the structure, like small things we can do to change the structures. How do you see the efforts at the individual level as well
Mm,
as at organizational level can complement each other if they
yeah.
can?
Oh, Ivy, I love this. This is actually a very deep question, and I love this. I have to recommend another book for you. I have it right here, which is called It's on You by Nick Chater and George Lowenstein. And they talk about exactly this question is what is the relationship between individual level efforts and systemic level efforts? Because they're, of course, not mutually exclusive. We can try to give people tools to change their individual behavior while we also change the playing field to make it more level for everybody. However, and this is the research that their book presents, there is evidence to suggest that it's really difficult for people to hold these two frames, the individual frame and the system frame, in their mind at the same time. So if we talk only about the individual level approaches, women have to negotiate more, mothers need to come back to work faster after they have a baby, then we kind of get sucked into this individual frame and we are no longer able to see the systemic components of the problem. And this has been shown in many realms, including in women's advancement, environmental protection, people's willingness to endorse higher taxes to solve income inequality, and a variety of other fields. The research is also very conclusive that the systemic efforts and the systemic changes yield much better results and much more progress than individual solutions. So, I want to believe in the world where it's like, let's do everything. Let's do both the individual solutions and also the systemic solutions. But in reality, we have constraints. Time is limited, money is limited, people's attention span is limited, and also people's goodwill is limited. Even the best intentioned senior leaders, they just can't endorse 15 different initiatives at once. They're going to focus on maybe 2 or 3 priorities. And so I'm coming at this from the kind of perspective where I just want to see results. I want to see workplaces that genuinely are able to identify and advance the most skilled, the most competent talent, regardless of what kind of package the talent comes in. And the research tells us that the most effective way to get there is to focus on tweaking the systems rather than to train individuals to somehow be better or be different.
Right, right, exactly. Thank you so much for that insight. My next question is about one thing you said once in the panel discussion at the Gender Equality Evidence Hub. I was so glad to watch that recording, and it was insightful, very. So you said we share this passion for action and for making evidence not only accessible but really easy to put into practice. So could you please share with our audience what it means to make evidence easy to put into practice in organization?
Yeah, this is a real passion of mine. I spend a lot of my time conducting research and trying to identify and test concrete workplace solutions that would level the playing field. But I spend almost an equal amount of time making sure that the insights we're generating and the knowledge we're generating in academia actually gets into the hands of people like you all on this call today who are on the front lines, working in real organizations, managing people who can put this knowledge into practice and actually change workplaces for the better. Because the reality is, most working people are busy. Their plate is more than full with all the stuff that they're being asked to do on a daily basis. They don't have time to go read 70-page academic journals, peer-reviewed papers published in journals that are behind a paywall anyway, right? So I think as academics, it's our responsibility to sort of create that bridge between academia and practice and find ways of presenting our knowledge in a way that becomes more actionable. So very concretely, as you might have noticed in my presentations, there was one chart, but for the most part, it's bullet points is what's the core takeaway. We don't have to dig into the detailed statistical analyses that we did behind the scenes, the p-values, the statistical significance. No one cares. In my experience, business leaders care about what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to do. Give me the rationale and tell me what to do. And for many academics, it's a stretch because it requires generalizing. It requires losing a bit of the nuance and the caveats. Well, but if this, but I just really think that it's important to push ourselves to go there so that we actually can change what happens on the ground in workplaces. And that's
That's
my passion.
amazing. That's amazing. I remember in your presentation, you shared that when women who applied the job first time but didn't get the chance to be promoted, once they give the information, you were in the 20%, top 20%, right? And then
Yeah.
so more women and the gender gap got closed, right? So can you share a little bit more details about that research? How? Why did it have such a huge impact on women's action just based on that one particular statement? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that follow up because I actually went through it kind of quickly and I was wondering if people might have questions about it. So um re- clarity and reduction in ambiguity has been shown in numerous studies to be one of the best ways to level the playing field. So this can be something like in that study telling people, hey, you were in the 20%. Let us give you a little bit more information of where you stood relative to other candidates. In other contexts, it could look like being upfront with people about if there's layoffs, how many people are going to lose their jobs, right? So that instead of, oh my God, is it going to be one person? Is it going to be 10? Is it going to be 100? People have more accurate information to plan their next steps. It could be sharing with people transparently a criteria against which their performance is going to be judged so that they know in advance, oh, these are the things I'm expected to do in order to get the highest score, the middle score, or the lowest score, right? So there's a lot of different ways to be transparent. In this case, my colleagues who did this study actually conducted some follow up research to understand why we saw the pattern that we saw, which is women became more likely to reapply, but men became less likely. And what they found was that for women, learning that they were in the top 20% actually exceeded their expectations. So when they got that information, they said, oh, wow, I'm actually pretty close to the top. I might have a realistic shot at getting the next job. So it's worth it for me to invest all this time and effort in applying for another job because I have a realistic chance at succeeding. Whereas for men who were basically overconfident going in, they received that same information and said, oh, I'm only in the top 20%. I basically thought I was top one. I'm not going to bother applying again. Now, of course, if you're in the top one, you're also in the top 20. I mean, definitionally. Um, but it just kind of goes to show that there was a different psychological thinking pattern underlying the behavior. I think that illuminates something else that's really important for us to keep in mind, which is often when we see a gap, let's say a gender gap, men are at some level and women are at a different level, we implicitly assume that men's level is the right one and that we have to get women up to that level. So if men are more aggressive negotiators or if men take more risk in financial services, if they're financial analysts, we say women should take as much risk as men. Women should be as aggressive negotiators. I think what this study shows is that assumption is incorrect because the so-called optimal level that we're looking for might actually be somewhere in between, right? In this case, men started up here in reapplications, women started down here, and we ended somewhere in the middle. So I think it's really important for us to keep in mind that no one today is necessarily doing the optimal behavior. We can't assume that just because men are doing X and women are doing Y, that X or Y is correct. We have to create the conditions because we want the right people to reapply. We don't just want the most overconfident people to reapply. So, as we're designing these processes and these policies and ways of working in our organizations, we have to kind of try to create the best conditions for the right talent to rise to the top and then make sure that we have objective decision making processes in place to hire that talent or promote them or whatever.
That's very wonderful. Thank you so much. I think this is really engaged conversation with you. So now let's just open the floor for Q&A. So feel free to ask a question and feel free to, yeah, unmute yourself and or raise your virtual hand if you like to ask a question. And we welcome you to share the question in the chat as well, whichever you feel comfortable.
By the way, I also really welcome challenges. So if there's something that I said where you're like, I don't think I agree, I would love to hear it. These kinds of spaces are exactly the right spaces to have those conversations.
Okay, Professor, Chilazi. I want to be the first one to break the ice. I do have this
Great.
questions. Thank you so much. So I have a business analytical, basically it's a data science background. And when I first get into an intern job at MIT, uh, uh, I think that background got me into multiple places to practice my expertise. MIT is a great place, especially the MIT press. And I think one of my job projects back there is to help the system to migrate from an older database to a new one, the Outlook system. And since like I was basically doing the research job over there, so doing the IT jobs, the data migration is basically it's like across the line, but still it's not like across the line. It's like across my normal discipline to do.
Mm,
But still, I have to take over whatever the job that assigned to me by the director of marketing. So I do the IT job as a data migration. And since I took the classes at school as a data migration and data warehousing, so I just experienced the half day of training and started from the afternoon. I already beginning migrating the data from the old system to the new one. So everybody was shocked in the IT department. But the thing that I started noticing is that when I actually went to the IT department, I noticed that there are 6 guys over there and all guys, literally all guys, not a
mm,
single girl over there because it's IT. And when and most of them like showed this impression on me for me to be able to like pick up all the job after 3 hours of briefing and training, things like that. And there's an interesting phenomenon that I noticed that started from day one. Since started from the first afternoon, I've already been able to finish like a 20% of migration job. Then started from the next day, I noticed there was supposed to be like 6 people in the department, including me, that would be 7. And then the next day, 4 people shows up. And then the day after that, 2 people shows up. And then started from like the end of the week, like Friday. Basically, I was the only person who works in the IT department to migrating the data, to rebuilding the new database. So the Allbook system. So I felt like I don't know, as a female protagonist and who just newly exploring my potentials and capacities across the different disciplines of work, how do we break the stereotypical image as a female, even if we
mm.
hold this highly advanced data science background degrees, but still somehow, the male protagonists take our contribution granted. I don't know. So, so I'm just wondering, as a
Yeah.
female protagonist, how we break this image, even if we have this academic background with us, but still there's like an invisible barrier. We still need to like put in extra efforts to overcome it. I'm just wondering, is
Yeah.
there a more like a efficient way to do that as a female protagonist in the IT or in the data science?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Thank you so much for sharing your background and your story and your experience and for asking that question. So, stereotypes of course are those shared um generalizations that we have about what members of different groups are like. So, oh, women are like X, men are like Y, whatever, right? Like Chinese people are like this, Americans are like this, French people are like that. Now, some women, some French people might be like that, but it's incredibly unfair and it's incredibly inaccurate, right? To apply that stereotype to all members of a group without having any idea of their individual characteristics. And this is what often leads us astray. And you're right that there are a lot of gendered stereotypes, well, just in the world, but especially in the world of work about, for example, who's suitable for what kind of role. The IT guy. Actually, I have an embarrassing story of my own about this. I went to the dermatologist office and I checked in at the front and they said, walk down the hall, wait there, and the nurse will come get you in a minute. And I sit down where they tell me to sit down. I see into an exam room and there's a man in front of a computer. And literally in my head, my brain said to myself, oh, he must be the IT guy. And I'm sure the nurse is coming soon. And then, like, within 2 minutes, he gets up, walks out, and says, hi, Siri, I'm John. I'm the dermatology nurse. Come on in. I was like, oh my God, right? Because the stereotype that a nurse is a woman, and now there's a man in there on the computer, he must be the IT guy because IT guys are all men. It's so strong in my brain, even though I study this stuff for a living. So, the $1 million question that you're asking is how do stereotypes change? It's difficult, but it's not impossible.
Thank
And
you.
according to research, the biggest thing that works is exposure. Seeing is believing. meaning we have to see counter stereotypical examples in our own life. That's super powerful, but also in the media, right? Out as we're going out and about in the world. So we need to see more men as nurses and kindergarten teachers. We need to see more women as astronauts or engineers or IT techs. And the more that we have personal exposure to those counter stereotypical examples, the more those stereotypes break down over time. And sometimes that can actually happen surprisingly quickly. We included a story in the book. I grew up in part in Finland. And Finland had their first female president from 2000 to 2012. And a couple years into her tenure in office, her name is Tarja Halonen, she went to visit some local Finnish kindergartens. And she was asking these 5-year-old kids, 4 or 5-year-old kids, what do you want to become when you grow up? And the kids were giving all the typical answers you'd expect, firefighter or whatever. And then she asked a boy, well, don't you want to become president like me? And this little 5-year-old boy answers her, well, no, because boys can't become president. Because this kid in his lifetime had only ever known a woman president. So already there was a generation of kids for whom the default is that political leaders are women. So and of course, give it another 10 years. Unfortunately, these kids will be indoctrinated in the real state of the current world. But point is that this is the power of seeing counter stereotypical examples. So I would say if any of you are that, like if you're a woman in IT, be visible. Be visible both to other younger women who you can inspire, but also be visible to the men because they need their stereotypes changed more than anybody. And even if you're not yourself a counter stereotypical individual, do you know some? Could you highlight members of your team, right? Could you give visibility, give the proverbial microphone to someone else who can be a counter stereotypical example?
Professor, Professor, I actually have a following up question, if I may. So, how, as a female protagonist, how to deal with the male colleagues who shows aggressive to our performance? So who shows aggression or jealousy or whatever you call it to our performance? I mean, how to navigate across these nuances between genders and capabilities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm so sorry that you've had to encounter that. It's unfortunately a well-documented phenomenon in the research where women who are either in counter stereotypical industries, maybe a woman in IT, a woman in mining, a woman in software engineering, or just women who are in leadership roles in any industry, because leadership remains a male stereotyped activity, a male stereotyped domain. Those women encounter more hostile behaviors from men because they're violating the stereotypical expectations, right? That's where it comes from. It's obviously not okay. It's not fair and it's not okay. I wish I had some good foolproof advice for you. I mean, obviously, if people are menacing you or if people are treating you unfairly, disrespectfully, if there's harassment, if your performance is unfairly evaluated, that's something that has to be taken up with higher level managers and with HR. And there could even be legal implications because it could be actual discrimination on the job. So my recommendation would be to keep track of everything. Make notes of what people are saying informally, save emails, save any formal performance reviews. And if you start to get to feeling that there's a systemic bias or there's systemic discrimination going on, escalate the issue.
Well noted. Thank you so much, Professor.
Absolutely. Thank you for your wonderful questions.
Thank you for the wonderful answers.
No, thank you. What else is on people's minds?
I kind of want to ask a follow-up to Scully's question. So I've seen, unfortunately, in some workplaces, that there's a lot of competition that's created between women because women believe that there's only so many spots for women.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Whereas there can be collaboration between men. And I've been in positions where I feel like there's a woman who almost wants to, create will try to turn men against me if I'm doing
Yeah.
well. And I'm wondering
Yeah.
how you suggest combating that because I think it's really important for women to be able to collaborate and bring each other up together.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a fantastic question, Maya. And really glad that you also pointed out where this sometimes is called the queen bee syndrome, where it arises from, which is exactly this either real or perceived scarcity in opportunities for women, right? So these senior women are looking around saying, there's one spot. So if I don't get that spot, if it goes to you, then it means I don't have it. So it's you or me. Whereas hopefully we're moving towards a world where it can be you and me. Like multiple women can be in leadership positions, multiple women can sit on the board, multiple women can be on the project team. It wasn't always the case, right? Like go a few decades back in many industries, and even in some industries today, there is still that antagonistic dynamic. Um, how to combat that on the individual level? Great question. I would always look for as many senior allies and sponsors as you can. If you're a woman and those are other women, great, but they should also be other men because you need as many people as possible who are more senior than you, who know your work, who respect and like your work, and who are willing to use their own connections, political and social capital to help channel opportunities for you, right? To say when you're not in the room, no, Maya's amazing. Put her on that project. She's ready for the promotion. She deserves a bigger raise, right? You need those advocates in the rooms that you're not in. Um, Once you develop trusting relationships with those advocates, if there is a woman or anybody, but in this scenario, a woman who's actively blocking you, try to raise it with people who are either her peers or even more senior to her and gently say, listen, I'm struggling because I feel like there's this person who's really actively trying to sabotage, what would you suggest I do? Might you help as my ally, as my sponsor to neutralize her or something like that? And of course, if it's a really toxic scenario, I mean, there's times when there's truly nothing to be done except to exit and find a different environment that's not absolutely toxic. It's hard to know when that's the case, but don't forget that that is always one of the options you have on the table for you. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
that question.
Yeah, Harold, you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
So, Siri, I wanted to give you a shout out because I've followed your work and also Iris's work in Harvard Business Review and other
Thank you,
areas.
Harold.
I'm a resource person and I've been doing consulting, so I own my own consulting company. And wanted to share with folks like you did the book, It's Up to You. Was that the title of it?
Actually, it's on you.
It's
I'll
on
pop the
you.
link
Okay.
into the chat. Yeah.
Okay. But I've been following it, and so your model that you and Iris have come up with, I was able to glean something that basically gives you, uh, leaves you less vulnerable to the things that happened last year when DEI was weaponized. So your structural embedding model that you've talked about is like one of the best models in terms of avoiding being singled out for, not doing the right thing when it comes to working on inclusiveness and other kinds of issues. And it helps people look at it from an operations management perspective and embed it rather than declare it. Like, we don't have to tell anybody that we're trying to make work fair for one group of people. We're trying to make work fair for everybody. But we know
Yeah.
that hasn't always been done. So it's like, how do we balance those competing interests and come up with something that works for everybody? So there are
Yeah.
six books and people, five more besides you and Iris that I wanted to mention real quickly. One is Lily Zhang, who's my guru in terms of
Yes.
the framework fair that has come out early this year, and they look at it from a way of framing it fair access, inclusion and representation, and how do you actually act on that and be accountable for what you say you're doing. The other uh, person is James White, who has a book called Culture Design, which looks at it from a CEO perspective. Like if the leadership isn't behind all this, it's not really going to do what we want it to do. And I've had that experience as a consultant working with executive directors and, department heads and that kind of thing. The one piece that really jumped out at me, though, from Lily Zing's work was targeted universalism that John A. Powell talks about in Racing to Justice, or he has a couple of other books out that talk about belonging. Because I'm always concerned, I've listened to the talk about misogyny and sexism, but I'm concerned about racism too. So it's like,
Absolutely.
how do we not, how do we do that? How do we talk about that in a way that invites people into the conversation as opposed to turning them off or freaking them out because they heard something that was just challenging to them? So targeted universalism, I'm still learning about it, but it's a way for us to all be included in a conversation in a way that acknowledges who we are, but also that we might want the same things, but we have different ways of going about it and achieving it and understanding it. So how do we manage to communicate in a way that helps us look at how everybody wants to work and put in a good day's work and all that, but I'm not looking at it maybe from the same perspective that you are. And so it's like how to acknowledge that, but also how to not just have it be stuck in that it's the institution or organization that's about excellence. It's not about like group preference, which is what I think caused DEI, in my opinion, to be weaponized in the beginning. And we know, well, I'm
Yeah.
just going to speak for me. I know, having been in this business for a lot of years, that it's about power and control as opposed to that we know that people haven't always been treated equally, whether it's gender or race or other kinds of differences. My other
Yeah.
favorite group of people is just Glasgow and Yoshino from NYU that look at the
Yes.
legal aspect of all this. So like, what is it I can do or what is it I can't do? There you go.
That's this book right here.
So what is it I can do or not do, and how do I avoid getting dinged? And there's also a risk for not doing the work because they point out, for example, that Gen Z mostly want to be in a diverse workplace. They don't necessarily want to be just with everybody being the same. So when you draw back on the work that it's like what you're doing, Siri, that embeds it into the whole workplace or organization, when you draw back on it, that has consequences too. Because I might not want to work for your organization because I don't see you doing anything that at least invites me into the process, right? So their book that just came out recently is really a gold mine and has strategies, like seven
Yeah.
strategies that you can follow. So last thing, Siri, shout out for your contribution because I'm looking at six different
Thank you.
frameworks that help us continue to do this work in the post DEI weaponization era, and
Yeah.
that adds practical application as well as evidence base to do the work and to continue to do it. And when we feel discouraged, networking and staying in touch with each other helps, us know that this work is worthwhile and that we're not just out here doing it by ourselves. My last point though is I noticed that people are still afraid to do the work. So it's like how to invite more people to think of it as like everybody can share in this. We need to acknowledge that historically we have not had a meritocracy, but it's
Yeah.
like we want to, and Yoshino and Glasgow talk about this, like we need to reclaim meritocracy because we want people to come with their best skills and their best self, but we don't want to act like that everybody gets treated the same because that's not true.
Yeah.
So with that,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Harold, for the kind words and the really valuable reflections. And I popped the last book really quickly into the chat, but I would love to see all of those recommendations in the chat because there were one or two books that were new to me as well. So thanks for sharing. And I just want to double click on what you said here at the end about this weaponization and how to move beyond it, because I completely share your analysis. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing this current backlash against DEI as a concept and where the sort of movement in the last 5 years went off the rails is it did become very performative in many cases, right? It's let's organize the International Women's Event. Let's post the black square on Instagram. Let's throw the rainbow flag in the, front door. But I don't think anyone's ever quit a job because there wasn't a rainbow flag on the door or because their company didn't post a Black Square on Instagram or organize a Women's Day event. They leave because their ideas are never listened to in meetings, because they deal with harassment and disrespect on a daily basis, because they're mad that they're underpaid, because they've been overlooked for a promotion now for the third time, right? These are the reasons people leave. And so if we manage to fix the 95% of the workplace that is everyday experiences, that is not a program or a special event or proclamation. I loved what you said. I think you said embedded, don't declare it. Well, I wrote that down because that was a brilliant phrase. That's exactly it. If instead of just declaring and proclaiming, we just say, how can we make every person's experience in this organization a little bit better on a daily basis? We're going to retain more talent. We're going to get better performance out of people, and we'll actually make our organizations more fair for real, because just a message slapped on top of a failed system, it doesn't actually fix the system. So my hope is that this reckoning and this recalibration that we've been in for the last year gives us an opportunity to shift our limited resources toward those things that actually give us the biggest bang for our buck, and truly change the underpinnings of work.
Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and the series. Thank you so much for sharing your time and insight with us
Thank you.
today. It's been a valuable discussion. It's just been so wonderful. Let's give a big round of applause to Siri. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
tuning
And to
in.
all of you for showing up and for asking your amazing questions. Thank you. I've so enjoyed getting to spend this time with you. And like I said, really looking forward to continuing the conversation on LinkedIn, on email, at Harvard if you're there in person. So thank you.
So
Thank
Siri,
you to everyone who joined us. We really appreciate you being here. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to briefly share two upcoming events from this club. We'll be hosting a session on cognitive science and music on March 31st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and another one on sleep, emotion regulation and psychopathology on Friday, April 10th at 12 p.m. So we'd love to see you again with us. And please follow us on social media and sign up for the membership. And, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here
Thank
today.
you.
Thank you. Bye
Thank
for
you so
now.
much
for
Thank
attending
you.
the meeting, Professor.
Thank you. My
Chilazi.
pleasure. Have a great weekend, everyone.
you as
Thank you,
well.
Have a great
Siri. Thank you.